Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. I'm here with Pastor Chad, lead pastor at Freedom Life Church, and we are discussing this last week's sermon on fearing God. If you weren't able to catch that, make sure that you check our Facebook, or you can go to our website. It will be on there, and then you come back and look at our follow-up for that sermon. And so, fearing God is what we went over, and it was a fun sermon. I love hearing kind of the differences whenever the Bible's talking about fearing God, and we'll get into that question a little bit later. But first, was there anything that you left out or anything that you wanted to add for the follow-up?
Yes, I left it out. I don't know if I left it out on purpose or if we just didn't have time. I don't really know. Sometimes I don't know how all that works in my mind, I guess. But I do know that we kept the sermon really just, okay, fear God and don't, fear God more than you fear all of these other things. And so we kept it pretty just general. Here's the two options, and how a lack of fear of God can create compromise. And we actually did, I did maybe 3 different levels, if you will, of that, because we see Pharaoh and he's kind of the Satan picture, the devil picture, this overall enemy of darkness that wants to oppress us. But we also got into some of the, flesh and blood, examples of that in our lives, how we can get persecution from a friend or a coworker or, a family member or something like that. Yeah. It's kind of the manifestation of maybe what the devil's wanting to do in your life kind of comes out in kind of these flesh and blood examples. We also ended the sermon in a lot of maybe more internal stuff like addiction and sins and things of that sort. Yeah. And I felt like I didn't want people to feel as though those were 3 different things. Really what I was trying to do is layer things out so that you can see that in all of these different kinds of situations we have a tyrant, if you will, this thing that's over us that is demanding us to do what it says. And that's kind of the theme of the whole deal. And so it may manifest itself in different ways, but it's all coming from the same place. And that's the devil. That's our real enemy that wants to press us down. So I wanted them to see it in these different kinds of situations or issues or in these different kinds of manifestations of that. But the one thing that we didn't necessarily get to, because we talked about we don't fear God, where we fear God more than we fear the devil, we fear him more than we fear the opinions of others or these kind of persecutions that can come in the flesh. We fear him more than the addiction and some of what the addiction demands of us and things of that sort. We fear God more. But I think what tends to come out of that is, how do I build a fear of God in me? Where does that come from? And that's one thing that we didn't necessarily, maybe that's another sermon for another time. But it's one of those things where I think that can kind of come up, well, how do I do that? How do I build in a fear of God for me? And where I would take anyone, we didn't talk about this, but it is, how do I build a fear of God? It's to understand who God is. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What is his characteristics? What is he about? What does he do? It's in those realizations of who he is that builds the fear of God in you. And so 3 big ones that come to my mind are like the omni characteristics of God. So his omnipotence, he's all powerful. His omniscience, he's all knowing. His omnipresence, he's everywhere. Yeah. And so if I just take those 3 as an example, now there's, hundreds of other characteristics that we could talk about. But if those 3 kind of frame what I'm saying, is that when I understand that he's all powerful, when I understand that he knows everything, when I understand that he's everywhere, that shapes my fear of him. Right. And so when I talked at the end of the sermon, I think I talked a lot about like addictions and things of that sort. I go, what does it mean to fear God more in that particular instant is to understand who he is. So as a quick example, for any man, and I guess woman, I suppose, but I think it's primarily something that seems to attack us guys, but men clicking on a computer and going where we're not supposed to go, right? And struggling with the addiction of pornography. I go, okay, how do I let the fear of God be more than this tyrant over here that demands something from me. How do I get myself to fear God more? It's to understand, well, if Jesus was standing right there, you wouldn't click on that.
Right. Yeah.
You wouldn't.
Right.
But the reality is, he's omnipresent.
He's always around.
He is always there. Yeah. So he is there.
Mm-hmm.
He's omniscient. He knows what's going on in your mind, what's going on in your heart. He knows. Yeah. And so that tends to begin to shape my, oh man, this healthy fear begins to settle on me to go, okay, I need to move away from this. And it's kind of where we landed at the end of the sermon was the fear of the Lord develops a hatred of evil in us and begins to move us away from what's dark. It gives us wisdom. It gives us a strong confidence in who our God is. It begins to move us away from stuff like that. So the fear of the Lord is developed in us as we understand who God is. And so it's, man, when I fear lack, when I fear that I'm not going to have enough in life, financially even, and and I could speak from experience as so many of us can.
Right.
When we fear I'm not going to have enough, or how am I going to pay the bills, or how am I going to do this, then we begin to compromise. Maybe we were givers and now we're no longer givers.
Yeah.
We stop giving.
Yeah.
And we begin to compromise how we do things, and we begin to finagle this and move things around here and make irresponsible decisions and different things like that. We've all been there, and we struggle with this fear of lack and this demand to get what we want rather than what we need, and all of this kind of stuff. Well, okay, he's omnipotent. He's all powerful. He can provide in any circumstance. To have this trust in him, that he's my provider, that's a characteristic that floats to the top, that produces a fear in me of him, and that wants to put him first, that he begins to keep his rightful place in my heart, then I don't compromise, then I don't kind of go off the rails, then I don't make bad decisions, and I start seeing this moment of lack, this moment of struggle as not the end of me, and that I don't have to bow down to the demands of the financial issue.
Right.
I fear another. So I'm going to keep giving. I'm going to keep trusting. I'm going to keep, because I fear him over this. And then God begins to kind of come into that situation and bring provision and show me that he's faithful, Right. And so I think that's it. And we didn't get into that. Right. We didn't really get into that. And so, I consciously thought, well, maybe we would get into it here, to just simply go, if you want to build the fear of God in you, what do we mean by that? Mm-hmm. It's to understand his character. It's to understand who he is. And then that begins to give you the fear of him above everything else. Because then, that coworker that wants to rail against you for whatever reason, there's a fear in you that you won't fit in around the water cooler, or you won't fit in around the gossip circle at work, or whatever. If you begin to stand, if you understand who God is, that he's the one that is the lifter of your head, that he's the one that exalts you in due season, he's the one that, because, we talked all about those different scenarios, and the reality is that there's a character of God that's connected to every single one of those situations that begins to produce a right fear for him over the other. So hopefully that makes sense, but I think if there was anybody walking away from that sermon and go, well, how do I do that specifically? Yeah. It's to understand who God is, what his character is, and to let that kind of grow in us.
Yeah, that's good. So, your footprints all around there is in Proverbs, in the Psalms and stuff, talking about the fear of God, is hating evil, is beginning of wisdom. It's knowing these things, know that there's a better way, and the better way is to fear God over everything else.
Exactly, and I did that on purpose at the end of the sermon, where we were just like, in Proverbs. I think I actually said we're in the book of Proverbs because this is a wisdom you're about to get.
Right.
And it is the fear of the Lord develops so much in us. Mm-hmm. I ended just highlighting some stuff specifically out of the book of Proverbs on purpose, because I wanted us to feel that this is a deep wisdom for us, that we're going to experience difficulties outside of us, and sometimes even most of the time outside of our control. Mm-hmm. But this fear of the Lord brings wisdom, brings confidence, brings all the things that we read in those texts as we ended the sermon.
Whenever it comes to the fear of the Lord, could you shed some wisdom on us? Whenever it comes to the idea of between reverence, so respect for God, but then also actual fear of God, and how whenever he talks about the fear of God, how it's kind of the same thing, it's all in one. But then we're supposed to have those things, and because I think a lot of people will see fear of God and they look at it as a negative. They look at it as like, well, we're not supposed to fear God, just like you're not supposed to fear that. You fear the devil, you fear snakes, whatever.
Clowns.
Yeah, clowns, whatever it is for you. But you're not supposed to fear God.
Yeah.
Because I think that brings a negative connotation to it, where it's like we're scared of him or something. Could you kind of talk about how it is all of the same and it is a positive whenever we have both, when we have reverence and actual fear of God?
Yeah, I thought about it at the end of the sermon because I actually said that it's two. Mm-hmm. It's two things. At the very end of the sermon, we talked about it, where I just kind of mentioned, hey, it's kind of twofold. And I think what we tend to do, it's like what you're talking about, because I think you're so right on that. And I think us as Christians, we do that a lot. When we say, the fear of the Lord, mm-hmm. or the fear of God, we go, yeah. I mean, it's not, we're not afraid of them. It's just reverence. It's just all. The only problem with that is that if you start looking at the Hebrew use of the word fear and even the Greek use in the New Testament, you're going to struggle, because sometimes it doesn't mean reverence.
Yeah.
Sometimes it does. Other times it doesn't, even in texts that we would quote and say, that's reverence of the Lord. Even the text we read on Sunday, where where it was kind of that New Testament text that we really focused in on, where Jesus is going, don't fear the one who can kill the body. Fear
Matthew 10.
Yeah, fear the one that can kill both the body and the soul in hell. Mm-hmm. That word doesn't mean reverence. It means terror.
Yeah.
It means, you're scared. Mm-hmm. And if you look at it in the context of the text, you should be. I mean, right. that's the reality for it. But I will say this, it's really easy to see the difference if you think non-believer and believer. It's really easy to kind of see, yes, as a non-believer, you should probably have more terror of God because of how this thing is going to end if you find yourself in front of him without the blood of Christ.
Right. There
should be sheer terror of God, and we'll see that. I think the Bible speaks consistently of kind of that reality, that we're going to see that. There's going to be terror on the faces of those that figure out that He really is there, and He really did try to rescue them through Christ, and they rejected and ignored and denied Him, and then they're going to stand there and have to give an answer. But I think even though for the life of the Christian, I think even us as Christians, I think we need to have a good, healthy, and if I can say it this way, holy terror of God. I think that's always one of those things, because He is the one that He holds our soul in His hands. And so there is that. I equated it to my dad, because I love my dad, and my dad is awesome.
Yeah.
And as a kid, my dad was awesome growing up. And there was a great respect and reverence for my dad. I didn't want to disappoint him. I wanted to, honor him. I want him to be proud of me. I wanted all of that. But then there was also a terror in me for him, because I knew that when I drove the golf cart down into the creek as a kid, true story. You hit me up later, and I'll tell you the whole story. I thought, oh no, when
separate
we couldn't.
Follow-up.
That's a separate. That's my counseling session for later. I desperately tried to lift that thing over the railroad tie that was blocking the creek to keep things from going into it. I was trying to lift the golf cart. I had to push it up the hill and then try to lift it up over. I couldn't. So then I was desperate. I was like, I gotta get this fixed, because I knew it wasn't going to go well. Mm-hmm. And so does that mean that I'm scared of my dad and that does that make sense? Like that I won't run to him?
Right.
No, I still loved my dad. I still had reverence for my dad, but there was a genuine terror in, this is not going to go well, and this is going to be painful. Yeah. And so I think even for us as Christians, I don't think it's a negative to feel that way, that the correction of the Lord is there. The writer of Hebrews will say it is not enjoyable.
Right.
in seasons of His correction. It's going to be painful at times, and it's not going to feel great.
Yeah.
But we know that He's a good dad who loves us. That's the point of the text in Hebrews
He loves those
is that He loves those. We would be illegitimate children if He didn't correct us and shape.
Exactly.
And so I think if you look at it from that perspective, I think you get the difference between, okay, a sheer terror that He's going to send me to hell. Well, as a Christian, I have no fear of hell. I have no fear of eternal punishment as a Christian because I know I'm secure in Him. But I also know that he like a good dad, if I get myself involved in stuff that I shouldn't be, there should be a real sense of terror and fear of his correction, because it's going to be painful and it's going to hurt and it's not going to be fun. And that has nothing to do with my respect or reverence of Him at all. That has everything to do with, oh no, God's going to have to correct me now. And I shouldn't have got myself involved in this. And Dad's, and I've tried really hard to fix my problem myself, but now I'm going to have to face Him, and I'm going to have to deal with the consequences of my actions. Even as a son, I'm going to have to deal with the consequences of those actions. And so here it comes. And we've all been there.
Yeah.
That's the terror that I think is maybe different for the believer, that we can still have that. And I think it's important to have it twofold. That there's a reverence, there's a respect for Him, there's a I don't want to disappoint Him. It's that there's a awe of Him. Look at how amazing He is. That's also the fear of God. There's this reverence of Him. But then there's also He owns my lungs. And He can just snatch those out of me whenever He gets ready to,
Well, and He owns your soul.
And He owns, He does, and He owns my soul, and His correction is going to come, and that's probably not going to feel great, and I don't want that, But when we look at that through the lenses of He's a good dad, then we know that He's going to discipline us because He loves us. It's that age-old statement that our parents used to make when we were growing up. This is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. And I just thought, well, then let's switch places, and it's, false. And so, but that's what He's saying is this is going to hurt you. But this doesn't bring me any pleasure to discipline you this way, but I'm going to have to, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to burn some insecurities out of you. I'm going to burn some sin issues out of you. I'm going to burn your distrust of me out of you. I'm going to show you the way, and that may come by way of discomfort, and we can and so then to look at issues in front of us, and before we start making decisions, we can have a respect and reverence for God and a fear of God, but we can also have I don't want His punishment. That's the other side of the fear that we're talking about. I don't want to be punished by God. So you know what? I'm not going to do that. So then it begins to shape and counsel us on the things that we get ourselves involved in. And me as a kid, I did that. Started going, I don't want to get myself involved in that, because I know then on the other side of that, the tailblazer is going to come out with my dad, and that's not going to be fun. And I don't want that. And that terrifies me, and I don't want that.
That was a paddle.
And so you got to listen to the sermon. You got to listen to the sermon. Because I think I mentioned it in the sermon. So, it's just His correction was going to come, and I didn't like that. That was something that I did not enjoy, did not want, and so there was a fear of that. It wasn't a reverence of that. It was a fear of that. It was a legitimate fear of that, and I think it's okay for us as Christians to have both of those, because I think it helps us in different ways. The kind of two sides of the coin is I don't want to disappoint, but then I also don't want to be corrected by Him either. And both of those things kind of encompass that word fear. But I think having both is good. It's a good thing. It's a really, really good thing. It's healthy for us to have that. So if you have a fear of hell because you messed up, well, then I would tend to go, okay, well, then let's check where you're at with God to begin with. Are you a believer? Because if you're terrified that He's going to send you to hell because of what you've done, then maybe you need to look at, am I even a believer? Because us as believers, we shouldn't have a fear of going to hell and Him taking our soul and throwing it into hell. We should have a security in Him. And so if that's where your fear lies, well, then maybe that's a question of your salvation in general. But if you're a believer, it's okay to be like, I don't want the correction of God, because that's that's bad.
Well, even the thought of him having the power to take anybody's soul, cast it into hell. I mean, who else has that? No one.
Yeah.
And so for us to think that there isn't some type of healthy fear there, then I think we'd be fooling ourselves.
That's weird to not have the fear of the one who literally holds eternity in his hand.
Yeah.
And gets to determine where you go.
Yeah.
For us not to have a healthy amount of fear, that would be strange. But honestly, that's the fool that says in his heart there is no God.
Exactly.
See, the Bible would call you a fool to not have a good, healthy amount of fear, terror, if you will, of this God of the universe. It would call you a fool. It would say you're out of your mind, like you're not thinking properly about how it works. So us as Christians, we can embrace that. That's not a bad thing. We can embrace that reality as well. Yeah. And I think that helps to shape things for us. So.
Well, we appreciate you kind of clarifying some things and then bringing up some things that you left out. I think it's always good to get insight from the guy who's speaking on stage about where his thoughts were and where everything was going. If you missed this last sermon, you can check it out on our website at freedomlifechurch.net. If you want to check out more of our follow-ups, you can check it out on our Facebook or also on our website under our resources tab and check out all of our Exodus stuff. We're going to have follow-ups for every sermon in Exodus just to see where thoughts are and everything, just like we always do. And so I think it's really great to hear insights from that. And then life groups this Wednesday, make sure you check those out. We always, with our life groups, I think it's great because they go over the same things. They go over the sermon and questions that they have, maybe what impact them the most. So if you're missing out on life groups, don't be there at 7 o'clock and stuff. We have amazing groups, amazing leaders, and so make sure you don't miss that because it's great. And if you have kids, make sure you drop them off here at the church. We have our student ministry going on, and we have our children's ministry going on here, and so you don't have to miss out on life groups. We love you guys, and comment below if y'all have any questions or insights of what you thought of the sermon. Thanks. Bye.